Now I'm very happy to hand over to Jan-Gunnar Winther, Pro-Rector Research and Development at the UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, who will moderate the panel. Mr. Winther.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this beautiful room with a lot of people. And I have the pleasure to invite now the panelists, Morten Høglund, Anna Hamrell, I just mentioned you all and you can come forward, Petteri, Vuorimäki, Mats Frederiksen, and Corine Wood-Donnelly. There is a wealth of experience in this panel, and what we will address is how cooperation in the Arctic Council, especially within research and business, could develop with the current geopolitical situation. 3 diplomats, please take a chair. 1 representing business and 1 representing science. I think I will actually stand here so I can see you. So, Morten Høglund, to my right here, he's Norway's ambassador for the Arctic and currently the chair of the Arctic Council during the period Norway has the chairship. Before that, you were a senior Arctic official. Anna Hamrell, you are senior advisor and for Arctic Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sweden. Petteri Vuorimäki, you are the senior Arctic official, ambassador, Arctic Affairs, Ministry of Finnish Foreign Affairs in Finland. Mats Frederiksen, director of the Arctic Economic Council, and Corine Wood-Donnelly, associate professor of international relations at and the High North at North University, also a scientific coordinator for JUSTNORTH, as we have seen here on the screen. That was the introduction. Now you have to do the hard work. But I will start with you, Morten, as the chair. Yeah, and you need to have the mics going from one to each other. Morten, your team and yourself, you received a lot of applause and cred over the last few months for the successful handing over of the chairship from Russia to Norway, as well as in that handover, including a joint statement, 11th of May, I think it was. And you have also been able to resume substantial parts of the work inside the Arctic Council. Now, starting on a pessimistic note, maybe, even so, do we still have the bumpiest part of the road ahead? It's my first question to you. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Jan-Gunnar, and thank you to the Polar Foundation and the organizers, and good to be here again. Every road has its own bumps. I also want to say, when it comes to that we had a successful transition and able to restart some of the work. It was, of course, with the strong support from everyone involved, represented by here in this panel by Finland and Sweden. So it was a joint effort, very much. It's difficult to say if it's more difficult ahead than what's been in the past. Of course, when you operate in a geopolitical environment, things that happen geopolitically or in the world or in the Arctic, which do not necessarily have any direct relations with the Arctic Council, could affect what we do or try to do. So we are not in a vacuum. We have to adapt. I'm at least encouraged by what we have achieved so far. Every country, every indigenous people's organization saying that the Arctic Council is important and we need to preserve it. And a strong support from EU observers and so on. So that's nobody, or I have not, maybe I don't listen on that there, nobody has told us we should close business or we should invent something else. I have not heard that once. So that gives me the hope that we will manage. It's not full speed, it's different circumstances, it's not business as usual, and et cetera, but we have a forward and a long-term vision.
So looking through your diplomatic lenses and watching the development of business and science, which we are in particularly going to discuss here, what has been hampering business and science over the last couple of years? In the context of Arctic Council, of course.
Well, that we practically shut down much of what we were doing, given the circumstances, of course, Russia being the share before Norway took over in May. So that was, and in no other international organization that I am familiar with, like where states are involved, the science part is so integrated into everything we do. So it's so important, and it's also one of the reasons I think we are able to somehow continue and see a way forward. This is not only, political discussion between states, and so you have the indigenous component, of course, but you have the strong scientific role of the whole organization. Without the scientific input, we are not much. The business aspect has come later. It's also important, but I think it's very important for us as Arctic countries integrating business into what we do, also in terms of adapting to climate change and everything that's happening. But how scientists can lead the way, and we can open hopefully doors. But basically, it was we or politicians or diplomats closing the door for science for some time, which was unfortunate, but it was for a very specific and I believe a good reason. So, yeah.
But after this initial shock, where most things stopped, it's been a resuming of activity. And am I right if I say we are on a climbing and positive line? And I heard sometimes percentages of the work that has been taken up in Arctic Council. Would you like to be more specific on that? Substantial part, does that mean?
Well, more than half of the projects are, even if there are some hiccups or delays, are in production, to use that word. And I'm hopeful that many others will pick up quite soon. So we see a positive trend. We see strong interest, strong commitment from everybody. Of course, many did, for good reasons, ask questions. Do the Arctic Council have a future? Can we count on it, surviving all this? I think we have somehow replied to that. We have given the confidence that we are here to stay, and even considering new projects, at least at a very early stage. So yes, I see a positive trend, going slow, and as chair, of course, you always want to see things moving even faster. We will continue to push, but as my state secretary said, and as every Norwegian and other Arctic politicians have said, business as usual is not on the table. So there are constraints to what we can do, but I think we still can do a lot more than what we are doing at the moment.
Thank you for now, Morten. Then I will turn to Anna in Sweden. As we know, after Norway is finished with their chairship, there will be 2 years with Denmark and then Sweden. So the question is, if you could enlighten us, have you already started with fleshing out your program? Last time we had Norway, Denmark, Sweden in a row. There was some kind of continuity in the priorities. How does it look now?
Well, as we have entered into the sort of Nordic chairship period, we have started thinking, I would say, about our chairship, but more on a general level. And I think for us, let me start by saying that Sweden is committed to the Arctic Council as the preeminent forum for circumpolar cooperation. This means that our overall aim will be to strengthen the Council and its work. And the base for this will be the guiding framework will be the Strategic Action Plan, which was adopted at the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council, the first of its kind. It sort of contains the vision, ambition, and priorities of all 8 Arctic states for the sustainable development of the Arctic. Then, of course, we are also in dialogue with Norway and Denmark about the chairship. And if you ask me, I don't expect our priorities to be too far apart from the Norwegian and the Danish, since we all belong to the same Nordic and Arctic family.
Thank you. I won't ask you about details, of course, because you can't say it even if you knew them. But you said sustainability, and we all heard about what's going on in Kiruna. It's a colossal transformation of society, even moving society, and the green steel production, which is really a forerunner in the high north. So would you explain a little bit more about that project, and also just transition? Did you have any resistance in society? How does it look when you are in Kiruna these days?
Well, let me start by saying that we are quite proud of how our northern region has developed. It's actually a dynamic area with vibrant cities, universities, mining industry, space industry, tourism. I would also say it is a forerunner in sort of developing green technology and sustainable solutions. It's sort of our driving force behind the green transition in Sweden overall. And part of this is the hybrid development of the fossil-free green steel. That's one example. There are others. And to counter global warming, we all know that this is the way we need to go. We need to sort of transform our economies and our energy systems. And then business and industry has a key role in this. But if you incorporate business, academia, and also the political level, then you have a stronger movement and a sort of a stronger foundation for this transition. And it's a great advantage. And I mean, it can also create jobs. We often hear that, and that is not the least important, because we all want to see our northern regions prosper.
What I read recently is that people that were going to leave northern Norway, where I live, they didn't go south, but they went to northern Sweden.
Right.
Because you are so attractive.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I can add that the government is actually drawing up a strategy to cater for all the needs in northern Sweden, with sort of housing and infrastructure and what have you. So there's a lot going on, and you need to sort of coordinate this.
So maybe for the Kiruna case, but maybe more generally, do you see interest and investors from other countries, and how do you deal with that?
We see a lot of interest, I would say, and we see increased interest for investing and for other business opportunities in the Arctic from different countries. I won't specify any countries, but overall we welcome this. This is the road to growth. It contributes to growth, but the emphasis has to be on sustainable development, sustainable sort of investments. So At the same time, we also know that strategic acquisitions are one way that foreign powers use to gain advantage over other countries. So we have been thinking about this, as have many other European or EU member states. And based on the EU framework for investment screening, we adopted a new law that will come into effect 1st of December, and which will make it possible to prevent investments that may be harmful to Swedish security interests.
Thank you.
But that is not, sorry, I need to say, that is not an Arctic issue. That is an
more general.
Yes.
Yeah, we understand. So turning to the third diplomat in the panel, Petteri from Finland. You have made many impressions on me, but I will take two of them. You are very clear and sometimes outspoken, which I think many people actually acknowledge a lot. But at Arctic Circle a few months ago, you said something, maybe it's not quote, but very similar to, with some pride, I think you described yourself as the most non-diplomatic diplomat that were at the conference, and referring to an episode a year before. But you also said something else at that conference. You said we should avoid adapting an Arctic war mindset. I found that very thoughtful at the time. So maybe you can explain the rest of us about these two episodes, because there is some more to the story, I think.
You make it sound as if I'm the madman in the Arctic with sort of episodes of misjudgment or losing cool. Before attempting to answer, let me just say something else, because I realized that perhaps I've now come of age where I start having historical reflections. And one historical reflection that I had when I was listening to the plenary speeches was that exactly 20 years ago, I was a young, enthusiastic diplomat here in Brussels, representing Finland in the Qvist working group, which is in the lead for the Arctic. And I think, if my memory serves me right, it was in November 2003, when the European Commission for the first time came to the member states with its ideas on EU and the Arctic and the EU's Arctic policy. And there was a desk officer from DG RELEX, the Director General for External Relations, and he referred to the Arctic as a region of inhospitable living conditions, harsh climate, darkness, and cold. And I asked for the floor, and I asked him if he was aware of the fact that there are daily flights to Helsinki. And after the meeting, he came to apologize that he didn't mean it that way. I mean, I wasn't offended. I just thought it was interesting. And from that, we've really come a long way. I mean, I used to go to the Arctic events where you were shown pictures of polar bears and ice cubes, sometimes even penguins, which do not live in the Arctic, as you well know. I think the Arctic is now at the forefront on many fields, also in the European Union. And instead of a picture of a polar bear and an ice cube, we have this beautiful picture of Lofoten, I think, I was told. It just has one problem in the picture. It's beautiful, but there is not one single human being in the picture. And it would be important in these pictures to have at least one person standing there to carry the message that the Arctic is our home. It's the place where we live, we love, we work, we study, we do the things that human beings do. It's our home. It's not an outside museum for the outside world to conserve and do things. On your point, on the Arctic Circle, the point that I made in Reykjavik was that when I was there in 22, and I compared that to the situation in 23, the discourse and the atmosphere was completely the opposite. Whereas in 22, I was in the middle of a small room where people were saying that the Arctic Council is dead, or it's dying, and it's collapsing, it's become irrelevant. This is a time for whoever is out there in the wider world to move in. And I went there a month ago, and it was completely different. The Arctic Council was hailed as a success. The Norwegian chairship was hailed as a success, which it is. And the Arctic Council was again, rightly so, at the center of attention. The second point that I made in the plenary discussion there on the mindsets and the securitization and militarization of the Arctic, the security has become so important in the Arctic region. It's on everybody's desk, it's on everybody's mind. It's clear that we need to prepare ourselves, improve the deterrence, resilience, be ready for come what may. But at the same time, as Director General Becheva said, we still have the climate change, which is a clear and present danger in the circumpolar Arctic. And there are also other issues. The point that I was trying to make was that security, military security, security policy, cannot be the only prism through which we approach the Arctic region. Climate change, biodiversity, sustainable development, and I keep saying this at every single presentation that I ever give, indigenous peoples, as Hjalmar said. We need to protect their culture, livelihoods, and language, and living conditions in the midst of this. And never forget the fact that the Arctic is our home. I'm not a madman. Thank you.
Well, I hope I didn't say that. If anecdotes come with age, I wanted also to say I was so happy to see this photo, because it's like home, actually, my home. And for those who go there, it's Lofoten, Petteri, it's even Reine. You can actually stay over at that white building at the top of the island. It's a hotel, and it's beautiful. So that is something to plan for when you go to Lofoten. So, and you don't see people in that picture. Maybe they are so busy with business, and that is a segue to business. I assume in your work that you meet civil society very often. You interact with both the private sector and scientific community. And of course, we hope that's helpful in your work. But I could imagine, though, that sometimes, because the rest of the society is less informed on critical questions and recent developments in a diplomatic world, that actually it causes some challenges for you as a diplomat, that civil society, with a lack of insight, but maybe very strong will to contribute, take initiatives and so on. Is that actually a real thing for you as a diplomat, that you find that sometimes disturbing?
We diplomats have many challenges, but I don't think civil society is our challenge. It's an opportunity. It's a richness. And it's not so much a question of the civil society having, or the civil society and scientific community have limited information and insight as to what we do. It's just that they have different information, and we, the diplomatic community, we lack sufficient information and insight into what the civil society and scientific community do. That only highlights the importance of interaction between these two or three universes. And that is where entities such as the Arctic Economic Council, and I'm sure Mats would agree, why they're so important, because they're the interface between the business world and us humble diplomats. Or, for example, the University of the Arctic, U-Arctic Network, which brings together almost 200 institutes of higher learning around the world. They're so, though, crucially important. And I think it also highlights the importance of such gatherings as the Arctic Futures, because here we are together, the diplomats, scientists, activists, civil society, actors, and various other colleagues around the world. These are of utmost importance. And I, looking at Anu Frederiksen from Tromsø, I'm sure she would agree the Arctic frontiers in January will be of equal importance for the same purpose. And I wonder if Jackson Black, is here. They go from Anchorage, Alaska. He would say the same thing about the Arctic encounters in April. So I look very much forward to meeting many of you on these occasions. And I had a plan to cite you something. Oh yes, there you go. If I may, because this is something that I picked up over the weekend. I was there's a fantastic researcher at the UBC, the University of British Columbia, Merje Kuus, and I've had the opportunity of meeting her several times over the past decade. I've been interviewed for her papers and books. She's a social psychologist, and it's such a great pleasure to always meet her. And I read her latest piece on the social lives of Arctic expertise, or how to do transnational networks. And I think Professor Kuus captured something essential for events such as the Arctic Futures, and captures something essential on the way we do interaction in the circumpolar Arctic by noting, and I quote, "The Arctic is a prime example of what transprofessionalization of diplomacy is, a process that expands diplomatic space and intensifies diplomats' networks beyond their profession." And that's exactly what it does. And that's exactly why being an Arctic diplomat is probably the best job that I've ever had in my life, and I'm enjoying it tremendously. And then the last thing, there was a wonderful phrase that she coined. The term was Arcticians, definition of which are the specific intellectuals of circumpolar governance. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear Arcticians, now you know what you shall be called from henceforth. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one, but promise me to be very quick. Last question for you. And back to connecting science, private sector, and bureaucracy or diplomacy. On a scale from 1 to 10, how important is that connect for total defense in a society?
You're asking me?
Yep.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I can. So we talked about connecting science, private sector, diplomats, so they have a dialogue. And I see it as part of the total defense. That's my narrative. And I ask you, you don't have to agree, but I give you a scale from 1 to 10. How important is that connect in society between different spheres, if you wish, for total defense?
10 plus. It's very important. I mean, we diplomats, we don't exist in a vacuum. The defense does not exist in a vacuum. It comes from the interaction, it comes from the societal cohesion, which in turn enhances the resilience. So my answer is very important, 10 plus.
Thank you. Maybe we can check in the panel later, or if you want to pick up on that. But Mats, you have waited for a long time, and Corine even longer, I'm afraid. You know the business in the Arctic, in the region very well. So my first entry question is, who are suffering the most when it comes to the private sector?
Thank you for that. And I would say a lot of them are suffering, but I think it's also important to keep opposing thoughts because some are benefiting and some are suffering. And often what is missing is the complexity. So also it depends, if you care about who suffers, because 75% of the economy in the Arctic is Russia. 60% of the landmass in the Arctic is Russia. Obviously, they're hard hit by sanctions. If we go down on a much smaller level, then there was just an article in the news actually about a Finnish reindeer herder talking about indigenous peoples that is massively suffering right now because he cannot transport his reindeers as freely as he used to. The border is closed down because of a fence or something. So indigenous communities especially are suffering. So you can go from the very high scale to very, very small scale. But it also depends where you're looking. Fishing, a major important sector in all the Arctic states. The cod prices has gone up in the past year because of the war in Ukraine. So fishing, food cost has gone up. But at the same time, you got small fishing communities like Kirkenes that is suffering a lot, again, from closed borders and lack of trade. You got countries like Greenland and the Faroe Islands that because of sanctions has to stop sell their fish to Russia. So it's not black and white. I wish I could give you an easy answer, but some are suffering and some sectors are benefiting.
Yeah, well, reality is not black and white, that's for sure. So we talk a lot about sustainability, worldwide and in the Arctic dialogue. How would you put business in the Arctic in the context of being in average in sustainability or in the forefront or lagging behind? What is your view on that?
For those of us, we're 4 million people living in the Arctic. If we are not sustainable, we are basically cutting over the branch that we are sitting on. If you take a country like Greenland, 99% of their export is from seafood. If they continue to overfish, because right now the quota is quite high, it will ruin completely the economy. So actually the private sector is fighting for more sustainable fisheries against what the politicians are doing right now in Greenland. And it's really rare you will hear private sector in other countries saying, no, we want to be able to catch less fish. But that's in the interest of the private sector to be more sustainable, because if the fish disappears, that will harm the economy. You will see, and so that's one part. Another part is I do think that they are, to answer your question, more sustainable because we got cheap access to energy. In Norway right now, it was in the news that we have record high electricity prices in the south of Norway, in the same day that there is record low electricity prices in the north of Norway. That means you can use very cheap green electricity if you have a factory in the north, and you can use a lot more of it, for example, for hydrogen production. So in that way, it's sustainable. Yeah.
But following that thread, the forecast or the projection says that it will not stay like that.
Definitely.
So how does it look then in northern Norway with not so much energy available?
The good thing is there's a very simple solution, because the barrier for this is a human barrier. It's not a natural barrier. It's a barrier set up by, civil society group and politician, because we know that we are running out of electricity north of Norway. Or when I say running out of electricity, is renewable electricity, and it's going to be by 2027, 28. We also know that there is a list of industrial projects that are ready to be constructed, but currently cannot be constructed because of lack of renewable energy. But that's something that can be fixed like this if we decide to build more wind turbines and more cables. There will be opposition to this, and it might not be politically as easy as this, but it's important to remember this is a human obstacle. I think that's quite important to remember when we have this whole discussion about the green transition and so on. We can speed up these processes. Permitting processes are humanly made. That's not a natural obstacle.
You mentioned Russia suffering from sanctions. You may know this, I don't know, that's why I'm asking. In Yamal, with LNG plants, Have things slowed down the last few years, or is it still going on?
So let's go back to the opposing thoughts or competing thoughts. So the past 2 years, Europe has imported record number of LNG from the Russian Arctic. France, Belgium, Holland, and Spain has never imported as much Arctic LNG as in the past 2 years. While at the same time, a lot of things has been on pause. On the other hand, we see that there's the Russian economy is severely impacted by the sanctions, and the Yamal is also severely impacted. And I think that what we should notice right now is that you see this what is called like a Chinese pivotal, like a switch, a pivot to China. And what we see right now is we see non-ice class ships sailing on the Northern Sea Route with energy. And that's a challenge, and you only do this if you're desperate. You know, you don't sail with non-ice class ships with energy if it's not because you're under pressure. You know, then you will take the safe and sound route. So yes, they're impacted as well.
So on the sustainability and business in the Arctic, some years ago, the World Economic Forum developed this Arctic Investment Protocol that was transferred to your organization. Are businesses adhering to that protocol? Maybe you can explain very briefly what that protocol is as well.
So the Arctic Investment Protocol I think is a quite amazing document. It's a very simple set of guidelines, 6 principles of how to do sustainable and responsible investments in the Arctic region. And it, for example, includes listening, what we heard Hjalmar was talking about, listening to indigenous knowledge when you decide to operate, as well as what you represent, the UIT's academic knowledge. It talks about engaging with local communities and so on. And this document, just before the war, actually, we published 25 examples of companies that are following the principles. For example, LKAB from Sweden. You know, something that, you know, how do you do investments responsibly? The challenge here is there's a soft law document. It's not a hard law document. So no one is telling the businesses you have to do this. But a lot of companies are operating within it. Just a small anecdote, just 2 years ago, we were actually supposed to sign with a major nation that now we can no longer sign this document with. We were supposed to sign like a major nation was supposed to say, we support this on a nation level, the Arctic Investment Protocol. Something happened that ruined that, but there's a growing interest and more investors. I mean, that's also what we heard before, like the Arctic has really opened up in the recent year. We heard that from the keynotes, like geopolitical attention. Now suddenly India is interested, China is interested, South Korea, France, and so on. Everyone wants a piece of the Arctic. And we need to make sure this happens in the right manner. And the Arctic Investment Protocol is one way to guide these foreign investors of how to do investments. So it's more for the outsiders than within the Arctic.
Okay, so one last thing for you in this round at least. And a sensitive area, which comes, so when developing the Arctic with business, there is all kinds of aerial disputes. It could be connected to indigenous people's rights. It could be, as we heard already earlier today, 30 by 30, which the world has committed to, but not maybe dedicated to a region, which was said here, the Arctic region. And also this green colonization perspective and nature under pressure. I mean, some of these areas are very sensible to changes. So how much of all these combined is hampering, you think, a sustainable and constructive development in the North, seen from a business?
It's a challenge. And a year ago, we published a list of 72 companies, banks and insurance companies that calls for stopping investments in the Arctic region. These were big multinational banks and companies, and I will get back into the land rights. But the reason, when we called up these banks, and we said, why is this? Why is it that you don't want to do this? They said, yeah, because of the polar bears and the penguins. You know, like it was this unknown of what the Arctic is. And this idea about creating this giant national park is a challenge for companies. When it comes to land rights, again, I think we need to look at it more broadly than from a Norwegian perspective, where there's a lot of sensitivity. If you look, for example, to Greenland, a country of more than 95% indigenous peoples, indigenous-run government, they are actively calling for more mining. We will hear tomorrow from the mining minister. They are actively calling to build the largest energy projects in the history of Greenland that is being called for from the indigenous communities. If you go to Alaska, it's the same issue. That some of the largest mines and energy projects are owned by indigenous communities. So just to say, it's complex when it comes to land rights. In Norway, there's a lot of issues around it. I think it's being solved slowly but steady because we need it. You know, we cannot continue saying no to development in the Arctic region, and also we need to get a little bit of facts in. Right now, we have more space for parking lots and golf courses than wind energy projects in northern Norway. This is a challenge.
Thank you. So in Kiruna, just so I understand correctly, it was not really a stumbling block, opposition from community and inhabitants and so on the topic we are discussing now, Anna? Was there really a strong resistance that hampered or slowed down, or I mean, how do you regard this?
I would say, in general, if you look at sort of investing and what you can sort of exploiting, or what you should say, mineral resources or whatever, it can be a delicate issue, and that is why we are very sort of careful to have dialogue. We have this consultation act, for example, where we now sort of have to have consultations with the Samis, and I mean that is in line with government policy, which is meant to sort of allow the Samis to keep on living their traditional ways, and to hold regular consultations. So it's not, I mean, it's a balancing act, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. So Corine, thank you for your patience. I'll make sure you can have a lot of time. So the current situation is that we are lacking Russia in a way when it comes to data and the ability we have to monitor and actually then understand development in the Arctic on environment and climate and many other areas. How do you regard this lack of Russian data information competence in the short or medium long term? What does it cost us?
Well, you know, for the last 2 years, we've been watching the disintegration of relationships with Russia and the Arctic. And this is happening in relationships across all scales, from the highest level of politics to cooperation on fisheries, or even down to the level of student exchanges and university programs. If we're going to try to tally up the costs, we're going to be here a very long time, and we might need Mads's economic skills to help us out with that. But a lot of these costs could be measured with either economic or financial metrics. But many of these costs and the losses are priceless and intangible and unmeasurable. And so when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about not only the losses that are happening from the continuing monitoring and data collection that is happening around the natural sciences on the Arctic environment, but also the social benefits that come from collaborations that happen at societal level. In the short term, the gap, of course, it's causing gaps in our data sets, and we don't really yet know to what effect. We already have a lot of data that is telling us about the environmental changes that are happening in the Arctic, and we know that that knowledge isn't being seriously responded to by some levels of decision-making bodies. We already know that the Arctic is warming at an alarming rate, and that we really need societal transformation to take this into account. And if you, like, I've been listening to news over the last few days. I regularly listen to Reuters, and top of the news is how many toys parents are expected to buy their children for Christmas, and the number of items purchased in a second on online sales on Black Friday. And this is not really signaling a necessary shift in society towards addressing climate change.
Can I jump in just with one question? You talked about lacking data. What concerns you the most? We often hear about permafrost being a serious kind of data that is lacking. Are there others? What would be your biggest concern of what we lack today?
Well, of course, I'm a social scientist rather than a natural scientist, so my inclination is towards the natural sciences, or the social isn't towards the natural sciences, it's towards the social sciences. And so what I'm really interested in understanding is how societal transformations are made based on who is making those transitions happen and who are they making them happen for. So if we're thinking about more the long term in our data sets, of course it's important to know how Arctic ecosystems are changing and how they're responding to those changes. But we need to think about some of the wider societal costs that comes from lacking this data. And you know, this is stuff about like how quickly permafrost melt is contributing to ocean acidification, or how quickly permafrost melt is compromising energy infrastructure, which contributes to energy security, or how spawning rates and migration patterns of changing in the cod stocks and how that affects food security. So a lot of these things have societal implications that we need to be thinking about and asking more questions about. And with this lack of collaboration with Russia, we're really missing 50% of this picture.
So we were in a roundtable in Reykjavik a few months ago, the two of us, and there were people trying to stretch their minds to find out what tools do we have to get hold of some more Russian data. And there were a few things, maybe I haven't got all of them, but somebody argued very strongly that this agreement on scientific cooperation in the Arctic, which has found its place in the context of the Arctic Council, could be such a tool. The International Polar Year was also mentioned, and intensifying satellite data was also argued from some, that are all kind of ways, tools to compensate for this difficult situation. On the social sciences part, where can we compensate, do you think?
Well, I think the compensations for natural scientists and social scientists are in many ways the same, and that there are these tools to improve scientific collaboration with Russia and the Arctic. But as the representative science diplomat on the panel, there's something that has to be very clear, and that is so much of science is a variable dependent on politics. So much of our scientific research that is happening, and this is across all the disciplines, the natural and the social sciences, comes with constraints such as national budgets that are dedicated towards education and research funding. And much of the research funding that scientists have access to is attached to political drivers. And if you want to understand what I mean with this, like look at any funding website for any national infrastructure and look at what calls are being asked for, and you will see what is important in these particular research environments. So I don't have statistics or numbers about how much free science funding is available. And by free science, I mean science where the scientists are able to choose the research agenda and the research questions and shape the research themselves. But from the social sciences perspective, the chances of getting free funding is almost, a dream that's out there.
So pick up on your argument that science is politically driven, which of course is the case, but maybe more now than before. Science diplomacy, could that play a more important role, you think?
Sure, and science diplomacy happens across a great number of levels. There's science in diplomacy, science for diplomacy, and diplomacy for science. And so we're talking about whether or not science feeds into policy measures or whether or not diplomats are facilitating opportunities for science. And so I'm in no way questioning the rationalities or ethics about what is the current situation in our collaboration with Russia. But these tools that you mentioned, they really only need one or maybe two things to be really useful as tools. And that's political interest and political and financial investment in reopening and strengthening these scientific collaborations. So this includes, funding calls that allow for collaboration with Russian scientists, Russian research, Russian education institutions. It includes exchange programs for Russian students to come and work with our students and other young scientists. And of course, it includes the visas or the banking arrangements that support these opportunities to happen. Because as of right now, all of these opportunities are not available for the scientific community.
So one last question for you. If scientists are moving towards becoming more of the political dialogue through science diplomacy, advice, and so on, would you be concerned that the freedom of speech and independence is under challenge in such a situation?
Yeah, this is a particularly big challenge, I think, for scientists. And, I think you would find it difficult to find any scientist that wouldn't say that that their science is in the interest of society or has societal relevance. But a significant problem is that so much of the research that we do and the science that we do is based on the funders' interest and priorities. And if you ask yourself, how many of our greatest leaps forward as a civilization have been made by research that was funded from a particular call? I don't have the answer for that, but if we looked over the history of the greatest inventions of all time that would be attributed to societal transformation, that probably wasn't funded in a particular research call. And where these priorities become of great interest is, of course, in addressing problems that are transboundary in nature, which a single individual or institution can't achieve on their own, or issues that need an urgent solution. I'm thinking about the global response to the pandemic and this sort of influence and input there was into funding science that would find a solution. And so when that solution was found, the result and the solution was immediately rolled out nation after nation in vaccination programs. And how wonderful would it be if we could see the science coming out on climate in the Arctic, if we could see the response to that at the same rate in national policies.
So I will turn to the audience for questions, and while we are waiting for hands, Morten, from what you heard here, is it helpful? Did you get any new meat to your work as the chair of the Arctic Council? I mean, thoughts, reflections, or maybe all of this is very well known to you?
I think it was very relevant comments from all, and Petteri has been my mentor for the past few years, and he said something I will also phrase in a different, that we have to get used to, which we in a way has to manage several crises simultaneously. We have the crisis, war in Ukraine, war on our doorstep. We have the climate change now. Middle East is a so that attention span of everyone, of course, is short, and it's difficult to get that attention. But that's one issue. But also that we have to deal with issues which are of, yes, soft security, critical importance, and putting a pause button for 10, 15 years on issues like critical Arctic issues, because we have another crisis, which is, of course, devastating. That's, we have to find a way to deal with this. I don't have the solution, and I'm not saying this is easy, because we put our politicians in front of very, very difficult choices.
Do you think we as human beings are able to train ourselves to multiple crises?
I don't know. I think humans are have the ability to, train in and advance in doing many things where we previously has not had the competence. So I think we can be better.
So what the bright future when we now have a normal with multiple crises, and then in the future we take away some of the crises, and we are trained with coping with multiple crises. We really can take the few ones. So is somebody helping me with sending around this mic? Yeah. So can you also keep the order? I'll start here. Yeah.
All right.
Say your name, please.
Thank you very much to all of you. This was very enlightening. My name is Pamela Peters. I'm an environmental economist and sustainability strategist with 25 years of experience, the head of the Institute for a Sustainable Planet. And I went twice to the Arctic this summer. What a treat, because I do also work on new structures, including hybrid models for education to include traditional knowledge. So the next generation of observers and scientists can be of that nature.
Please post your question.
How much time do you give yourself to create new structures? There's one lady who talked about the Arcticians. I find that very innovative, because the structures that we have today caused the problem to begin with. So how much time and how are we going to go about creating new kinds of structures, of situations that really are going to accelerate a sustainable planet?
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned the word, didn't you, Petteri, first? And then Mats.
I'm just trying to understand the crux of the question, what you mean with saying that the structures that we have today have caused the problem. What structures caused?
Well, we talk about the invisible hand. There is no more invisible hand. There is a hand that's dynamically putting obstacles. I mean, you can't have a country where there's different energy prices, where's the security for investment. I mean, the mindset towards sustainability needs to be bigger than just greening what we do today. We have to reinvestigate many things, accounting systems, etc.
Tough question. Yeah.
Well, no kidding.
But Mats asked for if you.
Mats, you want to get it?
Well, I think it's a big question. Talking when going into the Arctic region, if we focus on this, because I think you're talking more on a global issue that we have, global structures. I just want to, because this is an important point in this managing the challenges of a changing Arctic, and this panel is the structures that we're not that many people in the Arctic region, and the current organizations are already, running on a shoestring, and that goes for the Arctic Council. It's a small secretariat. That goes for the Arctic Mayors Forum. It goes for the Arctic Economic Council. It goes for all of these current structures. So I don't necessarily think we need new structures. When it comes to mindset, that's a completely different discussion. But I would like to just talk about that the companies right now, what they need, and the states as well, is long-term predictable framework conditions. We need to understand where we are going. And right now, I mean, we heard from Morten that we are standing in a post-COVID, middle of a war, looming economic crisis in front of us. This is not stability. The question is, will we ever be able to build a structure away from this? I don't think so. This is the nature of the world. But it's just, we are very, very few people, very small organizations in the Arctic, so we need to work closer together. Like these groups sitting here needs to work closer together.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
No, can I just add? I was pushed by Mats when he said that we don't necessarily need new structures in the Arctic. I would say that we certainly do not need any new structures in the Arctic. I think the Arctic Council as such is fully equipped to deal with also the coming challenges. Obviously, one would need to look at how it operates and various other things, but there's no systemic problem in the Arctic Council insofar as the Arctic region is concerned. And also, I should add the fact, which has not been clearly stipulated yet, that also the European Union is an Arctic actor. The 3 member states, and then Norway and Iceland, are bound by the EAA agreement on the binding legislation that the European Union enacts. The European Union is a global leader on climate change globally, and that's very important also for the Arctic. The European Union has vast amount of cross-sectoral expertise in its many director generals, and they have the programs and the resources to play a very crucial role. And that should also be highlighted. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. We have time for one, maybe two, if the question is short and the answer is short. You wanted to say something to this?
Yeah, I had
please.
something I could add. You actually asked for a number, and for me that answer is 54 months. So it's not a lot, I admit, but I'm talking about that in the context of the project Just North, which has been not necessarily in self trying to create new structures, but trying to redefine the starting point for development in the Arctic. Because you can't have sustainable development without justice. Otherwise, without justice, it's just development. It's only development. And so I understand your question that we need to be thinking about societal transformation in a way that creates structures and creates processes that exist within planetary boundaries. And of course, we don't need more governance structures in the Arctic. We have governance structures, but we do need to think more clearly as a society about how we are going to shift.
So, no new structures was the answer from the panel. So one here, gentlemen.
First of all, thank you all for your presentations. So my name is Berk Vinvogel. I'm a PhD researcher at Ghent University, where I focus on NATO and the Arctic. Now, if I may, I have two small questions, but my first question is actually to Mats. Natural scientists regularly come with new data and new deadlines concerning the impact of climate change on the Arctic. I was actually wondering, how do businesses anticipate this? Because I suppose they have to make future investments and so on and so on. And then I actually have a question also for Petteri. Finland is now a NATO member. How has this influenced Finland's approach to Arctic affairs? And maybe you can speak from your personal experiences. Anna, you can answer too, but I don't know if it's relevant because Sweden has not yet accessed NATO. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So please make it
so just to say,
short.
there are two issues here, and one is actually related to what Petteri was mentioning about the war mind. We need to get away from that. So investors, they don't want a war. They don't want to move investments to, where there's potential is going to be a conflict. So that's number one. Also, climate change is number two then. And here it's actually related to infrastructures. If you build infrastructures in the Arctic, you will be challenged around permafrost melting, for example, in some parts. So it has an impact. And I think, the best sector you can look at is actually the fishing industry. Because we see it in Norway now, we see it in around the coast of Canada and Greenland and Alaska for that matter as well, that we see the fish stocks are moving to new places or disappearing at a different rate that we cannot predict. This has an impact on your investments. But the problem is in places like Greenland, you don't have an alternative. It's 99% of your export. So yes, it has an impact, but what can you do? Because the reasons for climate change is not because of what we're doing in the Arctic region. That's from what's happening outside the Arctic region. But yeah, companies are definitely looking at this.
Well, I think for businesses, how can business operators make decisions if they don't know what will happen in terms of the climate change? I think all the human beings are faced with the same challenge, and that's particularly difficult for the Arctic. Because I remember at last year's Arctic Futures session, there was somebody who said that it's impossible to understand what is happening with climate change globally unless we understand what is happening with climate change in the Arctic region, because of the linkages and other processes. So this will be of crucial importance. On Finland and NATO, the first point to make is that Finland's NATO accession shall not be completed before Sweden joins the alliance. That is the message that we've been saying for the past month and a year, and will continue to say that that will be very important for Finland, for Sweden, and for the whole alliance. Finland's accession, in our opinion, enhanced the security and predictability in the wider Arctic region. Finland has substantial capabilities. We've had conscription for decades. We never gave it up. We have contributed, allocated resource to our national defense, and we don't have an Arctic contingent in our military force because the whole of our military force is Arctic. The issue for Finland, of course, is that the Arctic security is on the one hand linked to the wider Euro-Atlantic security, and the Arctic security is also linked to the security of the Baltic Sea region. And Finland sits right in between these two regions with 1,300 kilometers of common border with a country who's waging a violent and brutal aggression against a sovereign Ukraine.
Yeah.
Having said all that, let's not forget climate change. Thank you.
We are running out of time, but I promised the panel to give us one take-home message. And you maybe said climate change already, because you are now allowed to have 20 seconds each. Would you start, Petteri? Very, very briefly. What is the most important message you would send to the audience?
Be respectful of the fact that the Arctic is our home. Do not perceive it as an external object of aspirations and interests. Be respectful for the people who inhabit the Arctic and to the Arctic states who are in the region. The Arctic will be the next big thing, irrespective of what else happens in the world. That's my firm conviction.
Thank you. Anna.
If I should say just one thing, I would say that with all the threats we talk about and all the challenges in the Arctic, let's be clear that the climate change is really the major threat. And the only way to sort of solve that is through sort of adhering to the Paris Agreement. That would be my take home.
Thank you. Mats?
I have 3 catchphrases that I normally say when I only get 20 seconds. And one is that we live in a world of 3 Ps: populism, post-truth, and polarization. That is having a massive impact on the Arctic region. Number 2 is that trust has been broken in the last months in the past, and business in the Arctic happens at the speed of trust. You know, when we do things in the Arctic, it's because we trust each other and because we work very, very effectively. And that leads to the third one of my catchphrases, which if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And what do I mean with this is right now, the table is on pause, which means that other people are sitting around the table and they had decided to put the Arctic on the menu. And we saw that at the Polar Summit held in Paris, where they are talking about the Arctic as a national park. So we need to make sure we are at the table.
Thank you.
I would actually like to connect to what Mad said, and in some of the notes that I had the point that I wanted to say that we have an increasing issue around Europe with a move to the right in politics, and along with that move to the right, which is likely coming as a result of disenfranchisement, but as of people who don't believe that the political systems can deal with the problems that they need to be addressed. But along with that comes with a suspended belief in truth and a really unhealthy amount of distrust in science, which of course leads to climate skepticism and such. And so if I had to say one thing, is we need to really be careful about who is deciding if something is relevant and who are they deciding it is relevant for. Is it relevant for those who are sitting at the lowest tiers of society, or is it only going to benefit those who are already benefiting from the system?
Thank you. And then the last word.
Yeah, as we are the chair, I just want to thank you, the audience, because you're representing different governments, different institutions, or just concerned, interested individuals. And the patience you have given the Arctic Council as a chair, the interest, the support, which is something we generally appreciate. Many of you have come to us with ideas and good, discussion points. So that continued support is something we do appreciate, and I think the future chairs will also appreciate that. So I just want to say thank you.
Give a big hand to the excellent panel.